And this meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
We've got a lot of great things. I'll let Bruce, we were just talking about some of the announcements, so I'll let him cover most of them. As you all know, the 100th, we'll be approaching the 100th anniversary of Flannery O'Connor's birth. And as we kind of get closer and closer, there are more and more kind of exciting events occurring. And one of the big things that we're planning, and we were just talking about, is the conference, the September conference, and I'll let Bruce give more of the details. We did just have I've mentioned before, but the Flannery O'Connor Institute has a grant for oral history project. We've hired a coordinator for that, and we actually had students present some of the oral histories, kind of the early versions of what they've recorded. And that was actually earlier this week. And we are this summer in June, I can get the exact date, but we're going to have a symposium for our Writing for Success grant. That's a grant that I'm actually the project manager, the PI for. And that grant's been really, really successful in developing some curriculum, literacy, podcasts, and all sorts of projects around teaching Flannery O'Connor, but also, teaching creativity. And so that's been really great. And I know we've talked to some other school districts that are really interested in adopting the curriculum that we've developed. So if you're interested in that, I'll include more details. But that's something else that'll be coming up in June.
Mm.
And with that, I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague.
Mhm. Okay. Hi, everybody. Announcements. I'm going to try to send out prepare an email posting, and I'll pass it along to Tammy about things that are going on next month and into the fall. Some of it.
Yeah, we can get that out. That's not a problem.
Some of the details are a little iffy, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about them now. Our next Zoom from Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities is one of our Zooms about NEH results. We're going to have two people from the 2023 Institute talking about Flannery O'Connor and Andalusia. Tim Vanderbrake, who's I see is with us tonight. There he is. Will be one of the speakers along with Ashley Massey, and that should be a lot of fun. And you talk to Tammy Burke if you want that link, and I'm sure she will remind you that this is a possibility. Okay, that's Thursday, May the 9th. Friday, May the 10th. We've got at least tentative plans. Not we. Atlanta has tentative plans to show Wildcat at some theater in town at 7 o'clock on Friday night. I don't know if that's free. Emory is planning to show Wildcat for free at like 3 o'clock. Oh, no, by the way, they're going to have Ethan and Maya Hawke there. And after they show the movie, they're going to have Rosemary McGee and Amy Altsnauer talking about the exhibit at Emory Library that apparently is still up and going to be for some time.
It is. We hosted them last month.
About O'Connor, Walker, and Benny Andrews. Okay, that's May 10th. May the 14th, those of you who are near Milledgeville, I'm hosting a reading at Blackbird Coffee Shop downtown, where Laura Newbern and Alice Fryman will be reading poetry from their new books. The day after that, May 15th, is the deadline to send a paper proposal for the upcoming O'Connor Conference, Flannery O'Connor's Second Century, Looking Forward, Looking Back. If you have questions about that, just email me, Bruce Gentry at gcsu.edu. And what's after that? In August, we're already starting to set up events. The next book club event, like this one, will be on August the 15th. I've already promised today. And we're likely to have one of these NEH Zooms before that on another Thursday night. I just don't know. We don't have the details figured out, but we'll try to get them figured out. Is that all of our announcements? I went through my stack of pieces of paper. Anybody who wants to suggest something? I know what else I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, we're done with the letters tonight, and so I'm happy to hear from people who have bright ideas about what we should discuss in the future. We've been through all of the stories and both novels, and a lot of it we've done twice. And do we want to go repeat something we've done once before? Do we want to try to find something O'Connor related that we've never talked about during book club? Hey, give me your suggestion, and promise that you'll show up if we take your suggestion about what we might read and talk about. The sky's the limit. Okay.
Well, the thing I was going to mention is, you mentioned the Emory showing of Wildcat. The reason it's at 3 is because SCAD is showing it later that night.
Oh, it's
And
SCAD
so,
that's showing at 7 then.
is it SCAD? Somebody's showing it. I thought for some reason I was
There's all I heard was
SCAD
it's
Atlanta or something. Yeah, but there's a theater showing it in Atlanta. Yeah, so they were trying to one up them. So yeah.
Of course. Oh, I know another thing. I was on another Zoom today about this is a national announcement, but it's not all sad. I just watch these people try to figure out how they're going to pull this off. Karen Coonrod and her theater troupe from Yale is going to go around the country performing their version of Everything That Rises Must Converge. They're going to go to Rome, and then Milwaukee, and then Houston, and then Cleveland, and then Charlotte, and then New York. And, performances all over the place. And someday, I hope by May the 1st, but I rather doubt it, they'll have this all figured out. But surely we're going to post what we can figure out on the website for the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities, and try to make sure that the word gets out about that. It's well worth seeing. That is not Rome, Georgia. That is Rome, Italy, and they're going to yeah, right, and they're going to make they're going to tape it. They're going to make a film of it. I haven't figured out yet whether that's the kind of film that you just put in a library for scholars to look at, or whether it's going to be a film that somebody can actually buy a copy of and watch repeatedly. But we'll get that all figured out. There's just stuff going on all over the place. Okay. The chat is open. Thank you, Jordan, Rowe, and Fannin, for your comment. No, it's not Rome, Georgia. They can't afford this. Just as we haven't been able to afford it in Milledgeville, to pay for that play. The chat's open. You can wave your hand when you have a comment. You can put something in the chat, and then I'll probably ask you to say what you just put into the chat. Mm-hmm. the final letters sometimes are very sad to some readers. I've had people read the final letters and tell me that they cried at the end. Somebody said to me earlier today that they thought Flannery O'Connor had the ideal attitude towards death. She is teaching us all how to face it. Both of those, I suppose, could be true, and both of those could be reasonable comments. I was struck by her comment that in 1964, that she expected to live into her 90s. And, you know, the question, I suppose, is she serious? Is Flannery just putting on a brave face or saying what she thinks her correspondent wants to hear from her? Or did she really think that she'd beaten lupus so many times before that while it wasn't pleasant, she could do it again and again and again and again, and you know, she trusted her doctors enough to think that she was going to keep at it for a long time, write a bunch more books. And I don't know, but if anybody has a strong opinion they want to talk about, by all means, you know, wave your hand. There are times when I can think she knows she's dying, and she's demonstrating towards the end how thoroughly she could put on the mask that she thought her friends wanted her to wear, or that her mother wanted her to wear, of "this doesn't bother me." Or maybe she really just did think that she was going to be fine, and she was going to be writing and writing and writing and writing forever and ever and ever. There's a lot of talk in these final pages about, you know, what her collection is going to look like, what's going to go into Everything That Rises Must Converge, the second collection. But it's not hard to think of reasons why an author might go back and forth about the contents of the next book, even if she's pretty sure that that's not going to be her final book. That, you know, worrying over the contents of a book is just something that writers do. And doesn't mean that they think they're going to run out of time necessarily. Everybody has second thoughts. So I'm pretty open-minded about that one too. Flannery sure does seem like Flannery when she's talking about her health. You know, and she says some interesting and quirky and very personal things along the way. I can take every note I wrote to myself about this final batch of letters and put it into two categories. They're big categories. One is things Flannery O'Connor says in these final letters that surprise me. It's been decades since I sat down and read this collection of letters from beginning to end. What I mostly do for the last few decades is read the parts where some scholar has quoted a passage from the letters because I'm proofreading. And did they get that right? And is it the right page number? And do I need to add the date to the, you know, the citation in an article? So I read the same batch of quotes over and over and over again. And it's kind of led me to think that I remember what's in the letters. And, you know, I have it on my mind that Flannery can surprise me. She can say some things that are quite odd, unexpected, self-contradictory. And I think we ought to talk more about the things Flannery O'Connor says that we don't expect her to say. That's idea number one. I'm going to talk about that for a while unless somebody stops me. Some things that Flannery says that surprise me, that don't seem quite consistent with the image of her I've built up in my head over the years. And then the other topic for tonight, unless you stop me, is what's Flannery doing about race in these last 2 years of her life? That seems to be the inevitable and sometimes unpleasant topic that we have to talk about. It's on everybody's mind. Okay, so what surprises me? Flannery says she doesn't understand children. What? How many articles have been written about how Flannery O'Connor had this brilliant understanding of children and you know, is one of the best when it comes to writing about kids in a realistic way. She says she only sees them from the outside. Well, excuse me, you were one once. You know what a child is. You probably still are. At the age of 39, you still are in touch with your childhood. What a ridiculous thing for Flannery O'Connor to say. How do you compare that to other statements that Flannery makes about, I can't talk about X because I only see such people from outside? You know, she says that here and there. And I'm skeptical about that. I think Flannery O'Connor thought she could write about most everything and get away with it, or that it was worth a try. And then she'll turn defensive and say, "Oh well, I can't really do that all that well. I don't know that much about." But I think she's plenty ambitious. She tries everything. Another one. These are just kind of random from my notes that the speech she gives, I believe it's Betty Hester on page 543. Yeah, she's talking to Betty Hester. And what must Betty Hester have said? Something like, I imagine that Betty Hester said something like, well, if I understood this person better, I could love them. Seems like a reasonable thing to say. And Flannery wasn't having it. She says, top of 543, love and understanding are one and the same only in God. Who do you think you understand? If anybody, you delude yourself. I love a lot of people, understand none of them. This is not perfect love, but as much as a finite creature can be capable of. About people being stuck with those who don't love or understand them, I have read discussions of it, but I can't think where at the moment. It all comes under the larger heading of what individuals have to suffer for the common good, a mystery, and part of the suffering of Christ. Well, maybe she's thinking theology here, but I think every sentence of that is carries a little jolt. Doesn't she write stories to try to understand the people she writes about? And, you know, when people say Flannery loves her characters, isn't that because she's lived with them as she's created them long enough so that the condemnation that she starts with dissipates a little bit? I find this a very, puzzling attitude. If you apply this to her mother, that's as close as I can get to getting through this paragraph and saying, okay, this makes sense. Of course, I love my mother, even though I don't understand what's going on with Regina at all. If Flannery had said that to Betty Hester, I guess I would have had a little bit easier time with this. I love a lot of people. Oh, do you? Let's see the list, Flannery, about how loving you are to other to other human beings. Love must be in quotes here. And so, you can see where I'm going with this, that sometimes Flannery will get into an argument with one of her friends and say stuff that is hard for some of us to attribute to Flannery O'Connor. Has anybody got any ideas about how to make sense of that? In Eatonton, somebody said, well, this was just good Catholicism and Flannery is turning, orthodox or displaying her orthodoxy in a passage like that. News to me. Well, okay, as an example of Flannery understanding somebody who's hard to understand and loving this character as a result, let's take Old Tarwater in The Violent Bear It Away. These are the pages where she says, he's a crypto Catholic. Well, if you asked Old Tarwater, are you a crypto Catholic? He'd probably say, what's crypto mean? And no, I'm not. Flannery thinks she understands him deeply, and that probably has something to do with why she would say she's on his side 100%, which may be some pages back. I don't remember. I ran across that line in the pages for today. So it's something about how complicated her attitude towards her characters can be, and how she can contradict herself. Goodness knows, none of us wants to be held to account about everything we ever said in a personal letter. We don't sit around being totally consistent to all of our correspondence about every little thing. And I don't really mean to, if I sound like I'm criticizing her for these comments. No, I'm not. What else is surprising? When the references I saw to birds in here were kind of surprising to me, because she makes what kind of satirical swipes sometimes when she's talking about birds. She talks about the self-portrait, and she says that the pheasant that's right there at her side in her self-portrait is a devil. Okay. When she talks about the swan she owns that she finds charming because it fell in love with a bird bath, there's a pattern of Flannery talking about her birds as kind of idiotic, stupid. I mean, what are their adjectives just used for? And yet, usually she forgives them. In this instance, on page 548, she says something about, well, this swan obviously has a very Southern sense of reality. Well, let's forget about birds. She's making a swipe at the whole South, her whole homeland, when she makes a comment like that. The South is like a swan that falls in love with a bird bath. Does not sound like she's about to become an agrarian. Did you notice that she says in these final pages that she finally sat around and read, she finally got around to reading I'll Take My Stand? The great agrarian manifesto? Well, it's at the end of her life. And she says, I never read that book. Oh, well, this is what those people thought, and it's never going to work. And, she does not, in her letters, at least with that correspondent, say, I'm a thoroughgoing agrarian. I'm on that team. And I had a graduate student who was once in tears in the classroom when he started figuring out that Flannery O'Connor did not share his deep devotion to agrarianism. Yeah, she surprises lots of people. This isn't really under the category of surprises. I'd heard this someplace. It's just a funny little story. She disliked the poem called Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovelier than a tree. Somebody told me recently, where did I read this? That the priest at her funeral was trying to read something literary and profound at her funeral, and he read trees. And whoever was there said, well, Flannery's spinning in her casket at her own funeral because her least favorite poem is being thrown out at her funeral. I rather enjoyed that. I rather enjoyed that story. One other thing that surprised me, and I should know better. I have gotten into the habit of talking to people about how Regina and Flannery made a deal, and Regina would leave Flannery alone, and your writing is your writing, and if you go on the front porch, you have privacy with a visitor, and so on and so on. So I think I've overdone that speech about the truce, because page 533, Flannery says to somebody, the only thing I can protect is my desk. Everything else Regina intrudes upon. She's all over my room. I was surprised by that, but I think, well, that's probably true, that Regina would not readily make a truce. She would not accept that. I was also surprised. Now I've lost the page number, that Flannery said that every once in a while she got into a mood and she would tear up as much paper in her room as she could get her hands on. I believe she calls herself a maniac, destroying manuscripts. This is the same person who saves all these letters, keeps copies of all these letters in order so we can read them later. But, someday she looks around and tears things up. Wow. What does that say about her? I had completely forgotten. I mean, I'd read it before, but I had forgotten all. We take a memoir of Mary Ann so seriously, and we see it as such a straightforwardly pious, positive project, that I'm rather astonished to be reminded by the letters that Mary Ann Long's parents tried to sue over violation of privacy in the construction of that book, and it didn't go to trial. The parents withdrew the lawsuit, but it's the difference between life and art, that, oh my goodness, they went through a phase where they were offended by that book that was so carefully written, and in which that child, it seems to me, is basically put up for sainthood, and yet the parents could figure out a way to be offended by the way that that child was talked about. And I don't know, if you ever sit down and read the whole of A Memoir of Mary Ann, I think you'll agree with me. It's like 100% positive about that little girl. I don't remember any criticism of her. And I don't know, that must have been a lesson for Flannery. Okay, so that's one of my bright ideas. And I'm going to switch into, unless you stop me, I'm going to talk about race. Okay. It's the end of Flannery O'Connor's life, and most of us want her to display her enlightenment at the end. We want her, as she's writing stories like Revelation and Judgment Day, to demonstrate clearly to her correspondents and to us indirectly through her letters that she is starting to accept the ideas that are most fashionable today about race. And I didn't sit down to read these final letters over again and say, okay, I'm going to take a lot of notes about race. But I'm sorry, that jumps out at me over and over and over and over and over. Oh, here's a comment about race. How am I going to react to that? What do I think of this passage? And it's the topic is painful for me. You know, I don't choose this. I feel obliged to talk about it. So, okay. Now, what can I tell you that you might not already know about what you've read? Not a lot, probably. I did finally pull out my old beat up paperback copy of Black Like Me and read the book for the first time and go back through the letters to see where she talks about John Howard Griffin and ask myself, how do I feel about this? Black Like Me was popular in the 60s. When I was in junior high, I knew kids who were reading Black Like Me for fun. Maybe they had been assigned to read it in class. And the collective wisdom of the junior high school kids I knew in Pine Bluff, Arkansas was, well, it's a little exaggerated. It's not that bad. But they didn't really deny that what John Howard Griffin was talking about was basically true. The premise of the book is that he's a white man and he's Catholic from Texas, and he decides that there's a way, he figures out a way to blacken his skin. And he travels across the South, and he's very careful to prove to the reader of this book that he passes as a Black person when he's talking to Black people as he's traveling across the South. And it's horror story after horror story after horror story of what he realizes happens to him because his skin color has changed. He swears up and down that his behavior hasn't changed. It's purely about how white folks react differently to him and Black folks react differently to him when he seems to be Black. Now, panic. Can I find my note to myself about where Flannery talks about this passage? Well, maybe not. Maybe I can't find it now. Well, basically what Flannery says about John Howard Griffin is he's okay. I could meet him. I read a couple of his books, but I wouldn't like him. And if he came and sat down by me on a bus, I'd get up and move. I wouldn't sit by him in public. Now, she doesn't say because he's passing as Black, but just because it's such a distasteful stunt, I think, for in Flannery's opinion. And I'm sorry, I've lost the place where I've jotted all this down for myself. The surprise to me was that there's a passage in John Howard Griffin where he says that he was at the monastery in Conyers and he met this brilliant, progressive person who invited him to go to Andalusia. Well, it's real easy to put two and two together. The person who's inviting him to go visit Flannery O'Connor is William A. Sessions, the person who wrote 3,500 pages of unauthorized biography.
And I was going to bring that up, so I'm glad you did.
And, you know, John Howard Griffin says, oh, he's this brilliant person we talked for hours. He told me that he was so progressive he couldn't visit his family anymore. Well, I think he's repeating what Bill would tell you, that I'm brilliant, I'm totally progressive. I'm so progressive I can't talk to my relatives anymore. Um, Nevertheless, it was an awkward thing, who is Flannery O'Connor willing to meet has been has been an issue. And she almost says she doesn't want to meet John Howard Griffin, but then she also says, oh, well, I could meet him as long as he comes to visit me and he's not in blackface. And it's really interesting to me to think of Bill Sessions being the one who's in the middle of this possible meeting. When I read Black Like Me from beginning to end with not much knowledge of it beforehand, it seems to me a fine book. It seems to me there's not really much reason for Flannery to be making fun of it on artistic grounds. Um, you know, the book persuades me that his stunt worked, and it was an experiment worth a try. And I don't know. Nowadays, I mean, talk about how our racial standards change over time. Nowadays, I can't imagine anybody trying to get away with a stunt like this. Oh, I think I'll go into blackface for the next few months and travel around and record everything anybody says to me and get a book out of it. I mean, blackface is they're just I just don't think there are very many people in America with any patience for such a thing. How Flannery feels about blackface, is that what bothers her? Or is it just that, or is she being bothered by the fact that this guy's a Catholic and he's going to suggest with his book, that he's suggesting with his book, that any good Catholic ought to be really liberal on race? And Flannery is what? A slow goer on racial progress. So if you've never read Black Like Me, I would say, hey, it's a book I can now, to my surprise, I can now recommend. So I go through all these pages, and race keeps coming up, and what do I do with it? Over and over and over, I say, okay, how do I put a bad spin on this? How do I condemn Flannery O'Connor with this detail of what she put in the letter? And then to what extent can I defend her, on saying what she says here? And, she does say some things I can kind of enjoy. I can see a rationale for, I can understand and like what she's saying. Her mama tells her she needs to write an essay for, oh, there you go. She needs to write an essay for the folks at the black church in town where Regina is friends with somebody. And Flannery says, yes, I'm going to write that. And she makes a little joke about having to do, writing on command. But she would have said the same thing if it were an assignment for a white group, I think. She's just doing what her mama says to do. And it seems to me the race of the situation doesn't bother her. She talks about how she likes the way the local public library was kind of desegregated because it was done quietly without a lot of furor, and she thinks that's how it ought to happen and that it should happen, that desegregation should happen. It should just be, not politicized, not made into a big issue. She likes Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, she calls him by his original name, and says his attitudes on race are attitudes that she kind of approves of. Of course, then she turns around and says, and unlike Cassius Clay, then there's James Baldwin over here, whom I don't particularly like. And you know, her inability to like James Baldwin more is a puzzle. I can go through some of her quotes where she's making kind of racial jokes, and I can say, well, that's her game with Marriott Lee. And it's very complicated, and we shouldn't oversimplify it. Marriott Lee is playing exaggerated liberal. She probably wasn't as liberal as she pretended to be. And Flannery is playing redneck. And so she makes little jokes about how she joins in with the racism of her community just for shock effect, just to play the game with Marriott Lee. Okay, you know, there are half a dozen of those, and I can say, okay, this game is getting a little old here, but I see that that's what the motivation might be in here. And then there's the letter that leads to the quotation that Paul Ely used to make people across America decide that they couldn't teach Flannery O'Connor anymore. I mean, I think this is the worst line in the New Yorker article about how racist Flannery O'Connor is. I haven't been to Emory to look at the original letter to check this, but that's not going to stop me. I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. Look at page 587. The letter at the bottom of the page to Betty Hester. 27 June 64. This is really close to the end. Flannery has already won the O. Henry Prize for writing Revelation. The great short story against racism, you know. There are several things in these pages where I get the impression that Flannery did not like Louise Hill very much, the back lady who lived in what we now call the Hill House. Various little personal swipes at her. She obviously came into the main house and did work there, and so she, you know, saw her somewhat regularly, and I don't see her paying Louise any compliments all along the way here. Okay, but we get to the 27th of June, and she's talking to Betty Hester. She's been to the hospital, and then they come back from the hospital, I guess in Atlanta, and she's talking to Betty Hester about what happened then. And here's the paragraph. You asked what was done when we came back. Nothing. We left in a hurry without washing the tops of the breakfast pans or the coffee pot, and everything was exactly like we left it. Rip Van Winkle didn't have it any different. Not even a glass of ice water to hand. Dust everywhere. The refrigerator full of rotten food. And Louise bowing and scraping and carrying on about how much she had missed us. Regina had told her hurriedly to take care of everything, but nothing specific. Anyway, even if she had, it wouldn't have done any good. They had a month's vacation with pay. And then Sally Fitzgerald puts ... I'm pretty sure this is the letter that ends with the line that was unknown for decades that Paul Ely then put in the New Yorker, in which Flannery O'Connor wrote, I show, show am sick of N-words. So it's not, she didn't even say, I hate Louise's guts. she generalizes and makes Louise representative of a group of people and, kind of talks Southern or talks Black to condemn the whole group. Well, darn, cringe, ouch. And what do you do? Do you, I mean, some people are. They start thinking about Flannery O'Connor and they start with a line like that and say, yeah, that is totally unforgivably racist. And now I'm going to go reread all of the fiction and see how racist it all is and how unforgivable it is. And we don't need to read this stuff anymore. Sorry, not me. I'm gonna stick with going through the fiction and saying, this is beautiful stuff. I love this fiction. And the mystery that will haunt me to the day I die is, how can somebody who writes stories like these, who wrote Revelation, then turn around and be in such a bad mood when she comes home? She's sick, she's in the hospital, she doesn't like Louise, but still, to write it to Betty Hester, knowing that this is going to end up being, saved, and come out with a racist comment like that. And then, somebody should write a dissertation, someday about how Sally Fitzgerald edited the letters. Why in the world did she leave that out? Was it to placate Regina? Did Regina care whether a line like that got quoted or not? Or was Sally Fitzgerald just saying, "Oh well, I have to pretty up Flannery O'Connor for the public. I can't tell the whole truth. I can't print this whole letter because it would look bad." Well, Sally, it looks a whole lot worse coming out now than it would have if we'd had, a few decades to get our minds around this. And I always had this suspicion as I was reading Flannery O'Connor's letters that ... might mean something, that, and I've read letters where Sally Fitzgerald was pleading with Regina, please let me publish all of this letter. She would go, she would make an argument for a sentence. And, there were times, I'm sure, where Regina just said, no, you can't quote this part. In a few hundred years, everything will be public domain, and we'll have a new version of all these letters in which everything gets published, and it will probably have a different effect on people. Jordan and I were at a gathering yesterday where somebody was talking to us about how Marriott Lee's family, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, Marriott Lee's family still has some letters that they haven't turned over to any archive. Well, darn.
That's what they said. That's what she said.
What's in there that Marriott Lee withheld, and why? Or that relatives of Marriott Lee have withheld, and why? Let me say again, Marriott Lee wanted to be the person who edited Flannery O'Connor's letters, and apparently her intention was to put more of Flannery's racism on display than Sally Fitzgerald was willing to do. And I don't know how I feel about that, because Marriott Lee was provoking Flannery. I mean, this game they were playing was encouraging Flannery to play redneck all the time. And then she's planning on turning around and condemning her for playing the game they were playing. I see a hand up. What do you want to say? I think we just lost the hand. Yeah. Okay. Okay, this is how complicated it is, and race is, I know Alice Walker said that she liked Flannery O'Connor because the Catholicism was so important that she didn't talk about race all the time. And she didn't pretend to be able to say everything that anybody needed to know about Black folks. But Flannery does write about race a lot, all the time. And let's not pretend otherwise. Okay, Laura, you have your hand up. What do you want to say? Just unmute.
Hey,
Hello. Thank you so much for this gathering. It's wonderful. I just was thinking about context and, how in emails today we can say things that, there's just, you don't know the tone in something someone says. And also, I wonder if, from what we know of Betty Hester, and I'm sure you know a lot more because you may have seen her letters, but I wonder if she would have been sympathetic to racism, and if Flannery would she have wanted to provoke Betty, or would she have thought, or would she have just said something a bit provocative without so much meaning behind it? I tend to want to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I also, as an artist myself, feel very conflicted often about what my part is versus with as you're talking about Black like me.
Mhm.
What do I want to be, an artist or an activist? And there's so much crossover nowadays that I think a lot of art gets lost in the and so I see that I've seen Flannery just be really resistant to being strong-armed into the role of an activist when she was really wanting to be an artist, and that was it was a sort of stealth way of doing things. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Right. I don't, this isn't a full answer to your comment, but we just had a series of articles in the last Flannery O'Connor review where creative writers were talking about, does Flannery O'Connor belong in the creative writing classroom? Because she's white. I mean, she's so white in her writing. And is that good enough for now? And there are clearly plenty of people in MFA programs who are going to say, oh no, we shouldn't be teaching Flannery O'Connor in creative writing classrooms. That, there are gazillion other people who ought to be held up as models instead of O'Connor. But yeah, it's complicated. I think she's a great stylist, and technique is, she gets an A+. But there are a lot of people who are, reading contemporary literature, looking for role models, and Flannery O'Connor is a role model for a very small segment of the people who are in MFA programs across the country. It's yes, it just gets more and more complicated the more you think about it. Thank you. Okay. Is that Teresa? All that appears on the screen is T.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it's
Yeah.
me. I'm on my iPad and away from home, so I'm
Thank
a
you.
little bit in a kerfluffle. That's so. What I guess surprises me and disappoints me is that Mariette Lee seemed to have an ulterior motive and was not supportive of Flannery. And I think I just find that to be crushing. And I don't understand it, because it seemed like they it seemed like Flannery felt that they had a meeting of the minds and felt quite a great sense of kinship with her.
You know, my memory fails me about what I've read, you know, in the past decades. We do have both sides of the correspondence sitting in the library here in Milledgeville. You can come read about 100 letters that Marriott Lee wrote to Flannery. I don't recall ever having read a letter from Betty Hester to Flannery. If they're at Emory, it's news to me.
I don't think they're at Emory. I want to say, because I remember doing like a deep dive into Betty Hester a while, like several years ago. I want to say University of Tulsa had some of her letters.
Really?
I maybe I'm wrong, but I remember it was a school where it kind of stuck out as, okay. Um,
Well, there was a
but
guy at Tulsa who was doing bibliographic work on O'Connor, and he did a primary bibliography on all of O'Connor's original um, um, publications. And Tulsa has oil money, so you know that's plausible. And who's to say they won't turn up?
well,
You
and
know,
that's what
where'd
Mary
those
Dean
go?
was saying was that they had um Marriott's letters to Flannery, some letters I think that just hadn't been released.
Yeah. So this is just going to be what happens in the coming decades, that people are finding little boxes where somebody stashed away Flannery O'Connor correspondence, and uh, and then what happens? You know, that uh, will they donate it to a library? Will they be able to publish it? Will the O'Connor estate suddenly say, sure, go ahead and publish a volume of Flannery O'Connor letters? You know, we used to be able to count on it that the answer would be no if you asked the O'Connor estate, can I publish? And now the answer might be yes. You know, with the death of Louise Florencourt, who
Well,
enjoyed saying no.
I'd like to think that in your retirement you're gonna do an Indiana Jones type, where you're gonna go around and discover all these letters and have some adventures and then tell us about it.
My dream is that I get into the Klein house and I start opening drawers and finding stuff that they didn't store properly, or get invited to go to the storage bin. You know, there's Georgia College has just been given the Klein Mansion, the house where Flannery lived when she was going to college, and that Louise Florencourt lived in for her final years. She gave it to the college, to my total amazement. And the relatives have been taking stuff home, but I think they're about through. And now I think, well, this is Matt Davis's new playpen as the person in charge of historic homes at Georgia College. He should go in there and play and see what he can run up on in some of these drawers. And you don't know what we'll find there. I've heard for years that Louise Florencourt was living in 2 rooms at the back of the house on the bottom level, and she never went into the rest of the house, and it was all full of family stuff. And we might find ourselves having to build several more buildings just to deal with all this stuff we have just gotten from the family. And who's to say, what they might have thought wasn't worth passing on. I can testify I made a big mistake back when I used to wander around in the main house at Andalusia. I remember asking Craig Amison, what's upstairs in those rooms? Do I want to go through that? And he would say, oh no, you don't want to bother with that. It's just a bunch of farm records. And I said, oh, okay, who cares about farm records? Well, now we'll probably have, 100 dissertations about the operation of Andalusia Farm and what really went on there. And And that's just my blind spot. Teresa, you had your hand up first. What else?
Yes, yes, I have my hand up. Maybe all of this is good. For example, the Bible is one of the most well-read books that the world has, and it's full of conflict and it's full of disagreements and things that you can take multiple ways. And you know, good old Billy Faulkner too, I think was perhaps as troubled as Flannery, and much of his work can be read multiple ways on different days. I don't know. I still don't understand Flannery, so that's just idle talk on my part.
Okay. Sue, you have your hand up. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, there seems to be quite a number of letters that are not in the collection. I read a book, the letters from the Brainerd Cheneys,
Oh, no, the batch.
and some of those I think made their way into the Fitzgerald edition, but there's so many other letters, and it would be interesting to look at those in light of some of the things that have been raised as concerns with our reading here, particularly the race issue.
Yeah, right. And this is I think the book we're talking about is Ben Alexander's edition of letters by a whole bunch of people, but it's mostly about Flannery and how he managed to get all these letters together that other people hadn't looked at. He repeats a lot of letters that had been published before, you know, which puzzles me. Why reprint them? But yeah, there are many more letters. There are several volumes of letters. There are letters in the Library of America edition that Sally Fitzgerald did, letters there that she didn't put in the habit of being.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. So you can spend your life trying to compile all these letters. And let me tell you, you know, it happens at least once a semester that somebody contacts me and says they've got another letter by Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah,
And
we got contacted recently for the Flannery O'Connor Institute. Someone reached out and when she was in college, I think she was 19. She had written, she was, you know, doing creative writing, and had written to Flannery, and Flannery had written back, and she shared the letter with us. So I might reach out and try to see if we can get permission. Me and Bruce were talking about that yesterday.
It's an ongoing project. It will never end, you know? I mean, it's just not going to end in our lifetimes. We're always going to be finding more and more of this stuff and wondering what to do with it and how to get it all together. It bothers me that letter I was just quoting that ends with that has that line that Paul Ely quoted. There's no book you can go to find that letter in its entirety. You know, if you want to quote that, you have to say, okay, I get these words from this, and I get this one line from this, and I don't know what's at the rest of the letter. And, you know, that's not a great situation to be in for anybody. I mean, it makes it sound like Sally Fitzgerald tried to make Flannery look good, and then Paul Ely tried to make her look bad. And how are we going to decide how we're supposed to feel about this, how to feel about this letter? Okay, I'm sorry. I realize that we have run out of time, folks, and we're past time. And send your suggestions and comments, and I respond to email all the time. And we'll see you in the fall. And those of you who are thinking about coming to the conference, you know, send me a paper proposal. My deadline is May the 15th. And my promise that I will get the program put together by July the 1st. Okay.
And we'll send out, we changed, you know, as we changed the name from Andalusia Institute to Flannery O'Connor Institute, I've changed the email address to O'Connor Institute, but we'll send out an email with some of these book recommendations and some of the dates that we reference.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.